Dear learners and viewers, I'm so very glad to be able to connect to you for today's discussion that is centering on one of our important papers in the MA course, MEG1. MEG1 is basically a paper on British poetry. British poetry, and we in this paper we cover all those poets who have right from Chaucer onwards and up to T.S. Eliot and other modern poets. And we give you a broad sense of how the British poetry evolved. And in today's presentation, for example, you will be able to see, we'll discuss primarily, the influence of metaphysical poetry. It is during the Renaissance times that these poets came and created such a buzz, and there was a bit of a vacuum in between, a phase where they were not referred to as much. But then T.S. Eliot studied their works and then created through his understanding, through his critical opinion, he said that there is a sense of poetic impact that these people have created, and readers at large should connect to them. So in today's session, we'll see what is metaphysical poetry, how did it start, who coined the term metaphysical poetry, what are the major characteristics. So we'll be able to see through what these people were trying to say. And we'll also look at the major practitioners of metaphysical poetry. So I'm going to give you an overview as to what constitutes metaphysical poetry, primary concerns, what did they engage with, did they focus on love, what kind of love, physical love versus platonic love, and critical approaches, how people from time to time have read about metaphysical poetry, examples and explanation of select passages I'll try to discuss with you. So let's get started with this. And I would say that when we are studying metaphysical poetry under this paper, MEG1, I think this term metaphysical poets was coined by Samuel Johnson. And he said this, Johnson's referred to this in a little different way, in a little pejorative way, because he said that these people affected metaphysics. If you look at the literal understanding of the word meta is beyond, and physical is the physical consideration, physical view, physical idea of life. So metaphysical poetry is people who look at life, people who capture life, portray the themes and issues of life beyond what is visible. So I think that there is this, when Johnson talked about it, Samuel Johnson coined this term. He said that, these people crossed the boundaries and kind of transcended the visible space or the space kind of delineated for the poets. So 17th century poets whose work is characterized by the use of complex and elaborate images or conceits. We will discuss at large what is conceit, what is the far-fetched comparison part, typically using an intellectual form of argumentation to express emotional states. This is very important. Like these people, when we are discussing about John Donne, Andrew Marvell, other people, like they just in line with university wits. University wits, when we discussed in last class, Lyly, Keats, Marlowe, Nash, these people also studied in major universities, Oxford, Cambridge. So and they have a certain degree of academic orientation. So they invest huge degree of their learning into their poetry. Of course, they present it in a very colloquial manner. We'll discuss that. And let's look at who are the major poets. We can look at, for our understanding, John Donne, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, and Andrew Marvell, and there are a couple of other poets. I mean, it's not that big a list, but these people, let's look at their characteristics and see how they managed to create that impact. It is the metaphysical poetry is spiritual and often religious themes. For example, if I give you example of John Donne, you will find that the first phase he engages with all themes, including love, including the mundane affairs. But towards the second phase, he completely devotes himself to religious poetry, Better My Heart, and all those poems focus on love as the unison of soul. Very important thrust. And if we go back and see that kind of in the chronological way, today it is easy to talk about physical love, carnal love, but in those days, Renaissance time, 17th century, you find that there was a bit of a problem, and church was dominant, and they were saying that only a sense of distance from the physical world, distance from the mundane world, and the kind of temptations is important, and that is the only way to achieve sense of nearness to God. So now these people are coming to us and kind of giving us kind of response, a rebuttal, a kind of break to that thinking, and they are saying no celibacy, but physical understanding of this world will count in a big way. So physical love is not something profane. They are saying that it is when you look at John Donne, he says, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. And then he, in one of the poems, he seeks canonization. He claims for canonization, sainthood, for his act of indulgence in the act of love, physical love. So metaphors, puns, paradoxes, and meter. But what you find in this, that these poets come to us and such important comparisons play upon languages. When we say pun, paradoxes are created, and meter, very structured understanding, argumentation is being put to us to create the impact. Some of the poems are highly dialogic, as if they are talking to you, so conversational, as if they are trying to engage you in that discussion to bring forward a point of, like some people call, some analysts, commentators call these people lawyers, like they argue, argumentative. They say that this is as if they are putting forward a strong case with evidences in their favor. So we look at how a blend of emotion and intellectual ingenuity connected by conceit or wit. We find that in metaphysical poets, there's a definite element of wit. They come out with argumentation, and that argumentation is supported by a kind of comparison. This is conceit, that we were referring to, a little far-fetched comparison to bring home the point that they want to say. Suppose if they are talking about a religious idea, a kind of pleading for God, pleading for God's mercy. So they will compare themselves with one thing. They will set up a comparison and then will set up kind of their theme. So this is, this is something that very important, that, you are often asked about what is a metaphysical conceit. Metaphysical conceit is a ploy, is a technique in the hands of these poets to set up a comparison, and then to use this comparison to kind of build up a strong case for their favor. And they, in that sense, joking together of apparently unconnected ideas and things, so that the reader is startled out of his complacency. You'll find that, if you read the poem, the flea is like flea is a small flying hanging insect. And look at the poet, John Donne, he compares that with a marriage bed, with a temple of love, with a very spiritual entity, where some kind of intermingling of blood takes place of both the lovers, and then may lead to a new life subsequently. So this is how this yoking together. Some people find it too outrageous and violent, but we need to understand. Once you read that, you will find that there is some kind of linear order that they follow, and it sometimes strikes with the audience so well. And it is, T.S. Eliot saw huge merit in this. So presented new ideas and stories to their readers. So they are not about limited themes, limited images, limited metaphors. They are transcending that, and their academic orientation and knowledge is helping them. They are bringing forward new ideas, new stories. For example, like most heterogeneous ideas are yoked together by violence. So violence means here that, sometimes it looks too far-fetched. For example, if the flea I talked about, and then, he says that he should be canonized, he should be given sainthood for his idea of indulgence in family life. And comparisons and allusions, they are setting up comparisons. They are alluding. Allusion is a technique where, you kind of refer to something, you kind of take the audience to some place, readership to some different myth, different an analogy, different situation in history, and then you try to use that as a point to prove that. For example, T.S. Eliot also used allusive method in his all his major poems, particularly The Wasteland. So there these poets also use allusive method to bring home, hammer the point that they want to make. Elaborate imagery, complex conceits, colloquial speech to explore big topics. Big here implies that, the idea of spirituality, the idea of connection between man and the man and God, this world and the other world. What do we do? The idea of afterlife. And then all these ideas are, kind of negotiated with a very complex set of metaphors. And this, when I say colloquial speech, very ordinary, as if, dialogic, conversational, and the words that we use, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. So love, death, afterlife, sex, and even what lies beyond our own world. Done, for example, fond of using planetary imagery for the idea of space travel in his work. I told you that there is an impact of Renaissance knowledge. Renaissance knowledge here implies, like, the interest in science, interest in geography, interest in exploration, interest in transcending the visible space, going to, the interest in galaxies. So here also you find that these poets come and engage with newer trajectories, newer territories. Obliquity, irony, paradox are often reinforced by a dramatic directness of language and rhymes. You find that some of their poetry is written in blank verse. Sometimes they make it too rhythmic and very musical, highly ambiguous and obscure due to high intellect and knowledge. Sometimes, I talked about knowledge being very colloquial, very conversational, but you find that knowledge and intellect that you find, very learned components, and very intense, and very sometimes sit very heavy on your head. Every line conveys lots of meanings in new words. Well, loaded with knowledge, loaded with, like when they say, for example, this I'm repeating this sentence. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. It is not that he is asking the listener, the reader, or the person who has come to meet him for love making. He is saying that he is about to set up a case. He has some implied meaning, and this sense of kind of remark is so symbolic. So lots of meaning in that. If you look at how these people are being talked about, T.S. Eliot's influential essay, The Metaphysical Poets, 1921. So about 300 years after they were gone, T.S. Eliot dug them out of the library books and then created interest through this essay. Grierson has studied these people in a big way. You must approach Grierson and Eliot for this. Metaphysical lyrics and poems of the 17th century, then a famous essay. Dryden censored, done for affecting the metaphysics and for perplexing the mind of the fair sex with nice speculations of philosophy, when he should engage their hearts with the softness of love. So I talked about this, Dryden, and other people, they, Johnson, for example, to begin with, I talked about that, how they said that sometimes they just transcend the generally assigned limits or the lines for poetic discourses, but they do that with too much of ease. Let's look at Eliot's adoption of the label as a term of praise is arguably a better guide to his personal aspiration about his own poetry than to the metaphysical poets. So when Eliot studies that and kind of argues his case, he is basically developing something for his own poetic understanding and illustration. Objective correlative, for example, these two terms that I'm going to discuss are very important. Objective correlative, when we are saying objective is multiple items, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then different analogies, different examples, different metaphors are used to kind of to in a sequential way, in a desired way, in a linear order, to create a magnified impact, to create a solidified impact on the audience. So if I am engaging with the idea of religious love, if I am engaging with the idea of nearness to God, if I am engaging with the idea of physical love, I'll use 10 different ways, some of theology, of science, of geography, of the issues that ordinary people discuss. So to correlate to a theme, to correlate to an idea in an objective way, and what happens is that when I'm talking about one theme with so many images, so many metaphors, so many instances and evidences, I'm able to reinforce the theme much more. I'm able to create the impact much more. And then next is disassociation of sensibility. You find that the author, the poet here, the poet talks about, when he talks about this thing, you find this in John Keats's negative capability also, where you are talking about death, but not too much of absorb into that you are not able to think of life. So here, the poets talk about one theme, but they are able to kind of stand at a higher pedestal, higher point, and higher standpoint, and still, kind of keep themselves aloof from that, keep themselves little away from that, to be able to kind of get the theme going, to get the spontaneity going. So this is how key changes to the current system, moving towards beyond the physical, I would say, like you find that there is this definition of love. Marvel writes about the fact that he and his beloved are doomed never to be together, despite being made for each other. As lines so love oblique may well themselves in every angle greet, but ours so truly parallel, though infinite, can never meet. Therefore the love which us both doth bind, but faith so enviously debars, is the conjunction of the mind and oppositions of the stars. So these lines, for example, look at this, the kind of sincerity, the intensity that they invest into their poems on love. Marvels, you must have studied in your course the poems centering on love. Here also, he says that it is even if we are not able to talk to each other, we are not able to meet each other, but still our love will stand tall, will stand, our love will stand solid, and will kind of influence other people. So here, the physical love, and in these lines it is sounds much closer to platonic love also. You can see how in the poem Relic, a breastlet of bright hair about the bone. I'm giving you some examples. The phoenix riddle hath more wit by us, we two being are one of it. The famous poem Canonization. So objective correlative, the phoenix myth has been kind of invoked here, and poet is saying that we burn we kind of consume each other, we burn in the act of love, and then kind of recreate ourselves like the phoenix bird. Egyptian myth you must have you must have studied in your BA also. For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. Busy old fool, unruly son, why does thou thus the sun rising? These are the poems that I'm quoting for your reference. And the valediction, forbidden morning. Here the poet is in the poem, the beloved, the man is going for a journey, but he's bidding farewell to the beloved, but still the way he compares himself to the pair to a pair of compasses, and if they be two, they are two. So we are just like the different sides of a compass, as stiff twin compasses are the two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but does if the others do. So this is, he says that even if we are placed at a distance, if I may be away from you for some time, but our souls will be connected. At the top, as in the case of a compass, will be connected to each other at a very definite level. So again, the idea of new learning, the idea of science, the idea of mathematics, the idea of scientific instruments comes in. And I'm giving you this poem and another example from the poem Flea. Mark but this flea, and mark in this how little that with thou denies me is. It sucks me first and now sucks thee. So the flea, you may call it a mosquito also. It will suck your blood and mine, and in this flea are two bloods mingled be. So again a union union of blood is being referred to here. Thou knowest that this cannot be said, a sin nor shame, no loss of maidenhood, yet this enjoys before it woo. This is important. This gives you a great demonstration of the sense of poetic presentation that these people do. I talked about features, so concentration, big concentration, learnedness, unification of sensibility. Cynicism, sometimes they get little cynical about how life at large and life outside their places is going on, and then they reject that unconventional openings. Every poem just like a kind of little abrupt, little strange also, and then it takes the audience by the surprise. Learnedness, I told you about this. Death be not proud. See, this challenge to the death, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. Holy Sonnet 10, in John Donne says that death is just like, a step beyond sleep, and in fact it is powerless, it is weak, and no one should be afraid. You must read all these poems, Elegy 1, for the fuller understanding of metaphysical poetry. Fond woman, which would have thy husband die, and yet complains of his great jealousy. Again, a sense of love, physical love, afterlife, and sense of connection between two human beings. I'm going to close today with these references. So I'm giving you some books like 5 Metaphysical Poets, John Bennett, Helen Gardner's book Metaphysical Poets, Penguin 1957, Patricia Beers, An Introduction to Metaphysical Poet. I'm also giving you Hammond's book, Helen C. White's book, and then Greyerson's book I refer to, Metaphysical Lyrics and Poems of 17th Century, Edwin Honig's, T.S. Eliot's Metaphysical Poets in Select Essays, and R.G. Cox. So you can read through these references to arrive at a more substantial understanding to be able to respond to all your questions in your papers. And this is how we will conclude. We'll come back to you with another dimension. We'll study poet-wise also, who are all the poets in our subsequent lectures. Thank you very much.